Isaiah chapter number 53. I've been looking forward to getting to this chapter ever since we started the book of Isaiah. And I never thought we would actually get here. And now all of a sudden we're here, which means that we're nearing the very end of the book of Isaiah. There's, 66 books in Isaiah, chapters in Isaiah. And we're at chapter 53. So there's not a whole lot left here in Isaiah, but I know there's still going to be some real good stuff to come. But here for the past several chapters, we've been talking about the servant of the Lord. The servant of the Lord. I wish it was capitalized in here to help reveal more openly to us that this servant here is speaking of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Part of me actually thought about trying not to use Jesus as his name at all as I went through chapter number 53 and then tried to reveal it at the end, but I know that's kind of a pointless exercise for us this evening. We know who Isaiah chapter 53 is referring to because we've been able to see it coming now for a couple chapters. In fact, in chapter number 52, we saw him introduced at the very end of chapter number 52. I mentioned last week, I think it was, as well, that the term servant is used in the book of Isaiah for different people, different groups, but it's very clear here who his servant is speaking of. Some think, and this is maybe one way that modern day Jews are able to get out of Isaiah 53 and what it means, they think that the servant of the Lord here is referring to Israel themselves. I'm going to point out some things tonight from the chapter that makes it very clear that the servant here could not be referring to Israel. Not unless they are acknowledging their own annihilation, which has not happened. But they cannot, in a sense, get out of the meaning here by saying, oh, no, this chapter actually is talking about us. No, it isn't talking about you, Israel. It is definitely talking about a specific person that Isaiah was prophesying about one day who would come. This chapter, someone said, contains a beautiful summary of the most peculiar and distinguishing doctrines of Christianity. I like how he said that. The most peculiar and distinguishing doctrines of Christianity. What really separates Christianity from all of the other religions? What really separates actual biblical Christianity from every other religion in the world? Well, there are some quote-unquote forms of Christianity which don't seem very different, because it still involves a whole lot of works to be included in your salvation. It involves a whole lot of unknowns. You never really know if you've ever crossed the line into actually being saved or having any sort of eternal security. And there are a lot of forms of Christianity which still act like all of the other religions of the world. But what really separates true biblical Christianity from all of the other religions? It is found here in chapter number 53. The basis for our hope, the basis for our church, for ourselves individually, is this man being spoken of here. Chapter 53 begins with the continuation of a theme which we have already seen. And I mentioned to point it out, so let's get to verse number 1. It says, "Who hath believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not." We'll stop there and talk about these first 3 verses. The very first phrase asks a question, which wasn't meant to be answered. There wasn't to be a raise of hands afterwards, but it was this: "Who hath believed our report?" Prophetically, here Isaiah is anticipating couple things here. First, he anticipates, one, how strange and contradictory it's going to seem that the Messiah, Son of God, who's going to come in power, is also going to embody suffering and agony. He knows that what he's about to say is going to seem very contradictory. Whose visage, as it said in the previous verses of chapter 52, visage is going to be more marred than any other man. Here that this is the one who is bringing salvation to the nations. He's also anticipating the rejection of the Messiah. Anticipating that the words I'm about to say, you know what? The vast majority of you are not going to believe. Isn't that crazy to think about? What's crazy to think about is that one day there is going to be a countless crowd, multitude, standing around the throne on that sea of glass, as the Bible describes it, where you have God the Father and God the Son there. But beyond that sea of glass, with that great multitude of saved individuals, is going to be an even greater multitude of those who rejected, of those who were given the same light, but chose to reject that light, of those who were given the same hope, but chose to reject that hope, of those who chose to allow themselves to be deceived by the devil, to be deceived by their own hearts, to think about that multitude of people who will not be standing there innocent. It's very easy for us to allow ourselves to get sucked up into this idea of, well, poor them, if only they had one more chance. Imagine as they stand before God at the great white throne judgment. Imagine as they stand there, their names are not found in the Lamb's book of life, and they are taken by force and cast into eternity, into the lake of fire. Right now, our heartstrings say, but what if they didn't have an adequate opportunity or chance? I'm not going to go all the way back into it, but at the very beginning of Romans, we're told that there is no excuse because they have been given the natural revelation of God and the world around them. They have been given the special revelation of God in His Word that was delivered to us so that they are without excuse, Romans tells us. And so he asks a question, who hath believed our report? I'm about to tell you something that is going to be rejected by so many. And then he asks another question, to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? Here we see the arm of the Lord again, a theme which we have seen before. Remember back in chapter 51, verse 9, he says, awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord, awake. As if we needed to wake up the Lord for Him to gather His strength together. Later in chapter number 52, verse number 10, it says, the Lord hath made bare His holy arm in the eyes of the nations, and all of the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God. The idea of the arm of the Lord, and I talked last week, how the arm of the Lord represents His strength, His power. And so we ask the question again and try to figure out why he's asking this. Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? Who can open their eyes and see the power of God in what you're about to read, which is also ironic. Because what we're about to read does not sound like someone with great power, does not sound like someone who's in charge, does not sound like someone who is running the events that are to be mentioned. What we're about to read about looks, by all appearances, like someone who has been captured, who has been placed under control of man, someone who is not powerful enough to lead events. But we know, because we've learned scriptures, we know that that's not the truth. And so when we begin to look at the Messiah and the pain and the suffering, the humiliation which He will undergo, He is not weak in any way. He is powerful enough to willingly submit Himself to these things because of what is going to happen at the end. To whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? I dare say, to you is the arm of the Lord revealed. If you're saved, if you're a Christian, and you understand the great work that Jesus Christ performed upon that cross, the great work which he performed when he arrived back in heaven once more to sprinkle his own blood for the covering of the sins of mankind forever, I dare say you understand. Look at the next phrase. It says, "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant." Jesus did grow up. The Bible tells us that Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man, but all the while he was as a tender plant. A tender plant is one of seeming weakness. A tender plant is one that can easily be dried up by the hot sun and the lack of moisture on the roots. A tender plant is weak and vulnerable unless it is before him. Notice what it says. "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant." Before him? Who is this him? The Lord God. In God's presence, what may seem to be weak is strong. If the plant is before him, it doesn't even matter if the ground is dry. And listen to this. This is an encouragement to me, to you, to all of us. If the plant is weak, if the plant is in poor soil, dry soil, you know what? It doesn't matter. As long as the plant is before him. Listen to this quote. "Do not say, 'It is useless to preach down there or to send missionaries to that uncivilized country.' How do you know? Is it very dry ground? Ah, well, that is hopeful soil. Christ is a root out of a dry ground, and the more there is to discourage, the more you should be encouraged." Read it the other way. "Is it dark? Then all is fair for a grand show of light. The light will never seem so bright as when the night is very, very dark." So he is the root, the tender plant, as a root out of a dry ground. Jesus here coming up in this area of Nazareth, this area of Israel, which is not exactly the greenest of areas. This area of Israel, nothing good comes out of Nazareth. Nothing good comes out of that area. Even out of a dry ground, here comes the living water. Here comes the bread of life. Here comes the Messiah, even out of a dry ground. It says further, "He hath no form nor comeliness. And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him." So Isaiah, again, remember, these words are being spoken long before Jesus was ever born. These words are being spoken a long time ago. Isaiah here is prophetically speaking about, he's prophetically giving us a description of who Jesus is going to be. A description that we don't find even in the gospel accounts. Jesus was not a man of remarkable beauty. You think of David's son Absalom. We're told about Absalom's great beauty and about the beauty of his magnificent hair. He was wonderful to look upon. The ladies swooned over him. We're told about him, but it doesn't tell us that about Jesus. In fact, Isaiah says the opposite about him. It's not like because he was a God-man, he had such great beauty and strength that just everybody was drawn to him. As if because he was half God and half man, that he was taller and muscular and more beautiful than everybody else. What Isaiah reveals is that he looked like any other man. There was no special beauty or comeliness about him. Nothing remarkable about his physical attractiveness. Now, that doesn't mean he was ugly, but it doesn't mean he had the advantage of good looks either. You know what that means? It means that when we try to attract people to Jesus through form or comeliness or beauty, we're actually using means that are counter to Jesus' own character, to his own methods. He did not make things attractive to draw the people in. You know what might have worked better for Jesus? Is if he had built this massive home with flowers and gardens and fountains and pools and many, many rooms for folks to stay in, and then bid them to come to his big dinners with music and with dancing and with wonderful food, and it was going to be a great time, I think more people would have come to listen to his message then. But he didn't even have anywhere to lay his head. He didn't have a home, let alone a pillow to call his own. You see, he did not make things super nice just to draw people in like a trap. He presented the message and himself exactly as he was. And either they received him exactly as he was, or they rejected him. Now, we need to be smart. We need to be well presented. Yes. But we don't need to get caught into this trap of thinking that there needs to be something attractive about the gospel so that it captures the modern mind. I think in all of our efforts to try to make the gospel seem attractive, what we're ultimately doing is we're pulling a curtain across the face of Jesus Christ. No, come over here and look at the attractive gospel. Don't look at the man who's bleeding. Don't look at the man who's dying. Don't look at the scars on his hands and his feet and upon his body. No, we don't want you to see this. He didn't have a home. He didn't have 2 pennies to rub together half the time. No, don't look at that. Look over here. Look over here. Wealth, health, prosperity. This is the gospel that I want you to see because it benefits me. We must beware that we don't fall into that trap. Maybe not as grand as the TV preachers, but we could do it very easily on our own too. The only one who can make Jesus attractive is the Holy Spirit. It's further on, it says, he is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. You know, I don't think Jesus was the life of the party kind of guy. I don't imagine too many of his gatherings he was being body surfed across the crowd. I remember sitting in an auto parts shop, or an auto shop anyways, and I was looking through a magazine. It was a Christian magazine, and it had this image of a cool Jesus in his torn jeans and t-shirt and a cross, around his neck and long hair, and he was being body surfed across the crowd. This cool Jesus. And it wasn't making fun of him. It was making Jesus appear to be this kind of cool guy that fits in and is acceptant and tolerant of everything and easy to get along with. And that's not the Jesus of the Bible. Now, he's not the life of the party, but I don't think he was perpetually sad and stern and serious all the time either. In Luke 10:21, you can look it up later, we see where he rejoiced. He showed great joy. I'm sure Jesus was probably an interesting person to be around. I'm sure that he smiled. I'm sure that he laughed. I'm sure that he knew how to have fun, because fun's not evil or wicked, is it? Oh, there are certainly some forms of fun that can be, yes, when you take it the wrong way. But just like the physical relationship between husband and wife, there's a proper bounds in which it must be in, and it was given to us as a gift. It was meant to be used. So is fun. So is being playful. But yet, look how he is described here. He knew sorrow and grief so intimately he could be called here a man of sorrows. A man of sorrows? Let me ask you this question. Which person do you think would be the most attractive to have as a friend? Okay, let's say you had the opportunity to choose. Now, this person or this person. On one hand, we have this person over here who everything seems to be going well for them. They're attractive. They're fun. Man, they're constantly doing fun things. They're adventurous. They're going out and trying new things. Always a smile on their face. Nothing seems to go wrong with them. They're always upbeat and encouraged. But then you got this person over here. This person over here, everything's gone wrong. And they're not wealthy, and they're certainly not the most flamboyant personality. They're quiet and reserved. They have some struggles. They have some problems. Maybe there's some medical history which holds them back a little bit. Of those two people, which do you think is most likely to attract the most friends? Well, I think the answer to that one is obvious. Now, you might be more apt to go for the quiet, low-key kind of person. That's kind of me. I would rather be with a quiet, low-key kind of person, but think about this. it says he was a man of sorrows. It also says that he was despised and rejected by men. This is probably one of those reasons he was despised and rejected by men. He wasn't walking around wearing great clothes. He wasn't entering in and out of a great mansion, having great parties with wealthy and influential friends. Oh, he did go into houses of wealthy and somewhat influential people, but they weren't the kind of people that the crowd liked. They were the publicans. They were the tax collectors. So yeah, he might have gone to dinner in their house, but it certainly did not increase his popularity in Israel. You know, most of our sorrow, most of what we sit around and mope about is really just self-pity. Just feeling sorry for ourselves. Do you think Jesus sat around feeling sorry for himself? Maybe the closest he came was in the Garden of Gethsemane, as on the next day he knew what he was going to be going through. And many would say that it probably wasn't even the physical pain that he was going to have to go through that was the most troubling thing to him, but it was the emotional pain of bearing guilt of sin for the first time in his life, and not just any sin, but all sin. And then on top of that, because of the shame and disappointment of bearing all that sin, his own father couldn't even countenance him, but had to turn his back. You know, I want my kids to get to the point where disappointing dad is worse than any other discipline. Where they will obey just because they know it's the right thing to do and they don't want to disappoint mom and dad. We have not gotten there yet. I talked to somebody today, and then another pastor, and he says, "Oh, you know, brother, my boy's 10 years old or 11 years old, I don't remember, and he still has all these same issues with homeschooling." I was like, "That's not encouraging. Stop. No." You need to tell me it gets better soon, not that it just continues to stay this way for a long time. And then he tried to help me to remember what it was like to be a little boy and trying to, calm down and do schoolwork and stuff like that too. As he sat there in the Garden of Gethsemane and thought about what was going to happen on the morrow, he was definitely overcome with sorrow. But too often, that's not the kind of sorrow that we are grossing ourselves in. He was a man of sorrows, probably because of the variety of his woes. He was a man of sorrow, not a man of sorrow only, but of sorrows. All the sufferings of the body and the sufferings of the soul were known to him. The sorrows of the man who actively struggles to obey. The sorrows of the man who sits still and passively endures. The sorrows of the lofty he knew, for he was the king of Israel. The sorrows of the poor he knew, for he had not where to lay his head. Sorrows relative and sorrows personal, sorrows mental and sorrows spiritual, sorrows of all kind and degrees assailed him. Affliction emptied his quiver upon him, making his heart the target for all conceivable woes. And on top of all of the human sorrow that he underwent, there was the fact that he was God. And he knew beyond what the ordinary man would know about troubles and about people's futures. He bore sorrow. In 1 Timothy 3, one of the requirements of leaders of the church is that they be sober. Sober-minded. What is this? This is a person who's able to think clearly, with clarity. They are not constantly joking. They know how to deal with serious subjects in a serious way. But it doesn't mean that they're constantly somber and sober and they always look like they're sucking on a persimmon. No, they know how to handle things in appropriate seriousness. This is being sober-minded. They're not under the influence in any way, shape, or form, but they are able to see the situations clearly. Jesus is described here as a man of sorrows, that he was acquainted with grief. He was tempted in every point as we were, the Bible says. In fact, some of the temptations that he endured were probably even greater than the temptations that you and I have endured. Man, he was tempted outright by the devil himself. I don't know that I've ever been tempted outright by the devil himself. The devil's not omnipresent. He can't be everywhere tempting all of us at all the time. So we can't always blame it on the devil. I don't know where he is right now. I hope he's not here. I hope he is. Maybe he needs to hear a reminder of what his future is, the future of his God, Jesus, is. It says he was acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. We hid, as it were, our faces from him. Because there was nothing outwardly beautiful or maybe even supremely charismatic about him. And there's plenty of men and women on TV that are very charismatic, and I don't mean that they're Pentecostal. I just mean that they're flamboyant and they're fun to listen to and fun to watch. They have an overflowing type of character. I know people like that they're just easy to be friends with because they're just bubbly and they're just sometimes a little too overflowing maybe in character, but they're just, all of this personality coming out all over the place. That doesn't describe who Jesus was. What was mankind's reaction to him? Mankind's reaction was to withdraw from him, to despise him, to hold him in low esteem. I've been seeing a lot of posts recently about this man pulling a cart around Augusta County, and people are talking about where he is. I saw him out here one day. He had his cart, was pulling it very, very slowly along the road, and he stopped out here in front of this house, and he was out there for a good 30 minutes messing with his cart. I'm not sure exactly what he was doing, and then I see people posting, he's over here now, he's over there now. Somebody took him out of the county and dropped him off, and he came back and was walking around pulling his cart again, and other people bought him more stuff to put on his cart, I guess, and talking about this man. And it's very easy for us to look at somebody like that and think, well, there's probably mental issues. There's probably, some sort of an addiction going on there as well. And it's easy for us to look down on somebody like that because they don't have a home. Jesus did not have a home. When he began his ministry, he began I don't even know if you could call it an itinerant ministry. I mean, he traveled where the Spirit led, where he knew he needed to be, where it was his plan to go and to preach. Many times he was rejected. He was asked to leave. Many times he had to leave in order to keep the Pharisees or the religious leaders from doing harm to him because it wasn't time for that yet. But I also see myself in this description here. We hid, as it were, our faces from him. I also almost imagine here the Messiah, or at least we thought he was, and now he's being dragged up the street. Well, really, he's carrying, the cross post of his cross, and he's all bloodied, and I'm kind of ashamed to say that I'm one of his followers at this point. I mean, look at him. He could not be further degraded right now. He could not be much more further humbled than he is right now at this moment. Or as he hangs there upon the cross, not a penny to his name, not even a stitch of clothing at this point to his name, dying out in front of everyone. Well, it'd be really tempting to be ashamed. To be ashamed that he was my leader, that I was a follower of him, that I listened to him, and now look what he's allowed to happen to him. We hid our faces, as it were, from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. This shows that men value physical beauty and charisma far more than God does. A preacher who's good looking and very charismatic in his conversation and in his preaching, he's going to draw people around himself. Not necessarily because of good preaching, but because of his personality. But I think God could do more with somebody who does not hold those particular qualities. Because God wants the glory. And God needs a surrendered individual. Sometimes we discount ourselves and think, well, because I'm not at this level, I don't have the home, or I'm, renting and I haven't bought, or I'm not married, or I don't have kids, or I'm divorced, or I'm, older in age, or I've made these mistakes in the past, or I've had this addiction. Sometimes we discount ourselves because we don't think, in our own opinion, that we match up to somebody else's level. That God can't use us as much as he could use that person who seems to have it all. You couldn't be further from the truth, though. He doesn't discount us. He looks for a surrendered individual, no matter what they are lacking when it comes to other areas, even the mental faculties. He looks for a surrendered individual who loves him and wants to serve him with all their heart. And then he can take that person and use them tremendously for his honor and for his glory. We put too much value on physical beauty and charisma. And when we don't see it, we can even reject the ones that God accepts. Let's not be guilty of that at Shenandoah Baptist Church. Let's not be guilty of turning someone out the back door because of some quality about them that we don't like. Some quality about them that makes us recoil, something that they're involved in that scares us or bothers us. Let's not be guilty of turning away those who God has called to our door. Look at verse number 4. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. You know, at this point, the prophet isn't talking about him bearing the guilt of God's wrath upon himself at this point. In fact, I also want you to notice that at this point, he's not even intimating about death. At this point, whoever he's speaking about is a man of sorrows. He's acquainted with grief. He's going to have a rough life. But that's all the information that was given to us thus far. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. Pause there. You know, he made our griefs his own. He made our sorrows as if they were his. The image here is that he loaded them up upon his back, and that he bore them and carried them so we didn't have to do that. How many of us carry around our own pains and sorrows that Jesus already took? How many of us, sometimes even as Christians, bear on our own shoulders the weight of our sin? That either we refuse to confess and seek forgiveness, or even after we've confessed and sought forgiveness, we just couldn't let it go. And we just felt like we had to perform some sort of penance. And we had to just keep bearing that weight and that stain upon us. It says, yet we esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. I mean, yeah, the Messiah was stricken, smitten of God, afflicted, but the problem here is why. It says, we esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. And they looked at this man Jesus there as he dragged his cross up the road, as he dragged it up onto Golgotha, as he hung there and died, as he faced the Sanhedrin for what he, quote unquote, had done. And we look at that man and say he's getting his just desert. See, even God is against this man. Look at this man as he dies up there. Even God is against this man. See, God is the one striking him down. God has not prospered him. But why? Why was this happening? It goes on to say, but he was wounded, and this term wounded means to bore through. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. So why? Why was he stricken, smitten, afflicted? Was it because God was angry with him? Oh, Israel, they probably stood there as they shouted and jeered at him and thought, see, even God is striking and smiting you. As he shouts out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some would stand by and say, yeah, of course God is forsaken. You look what God is doing to you because you tried to set yourself up as a God being a man. But why? It was for us. It was for our transgressions, for our iniquities. It was in our place that the Messiah was suffering. Stop and think about this for a second. Verse number 1 says, "To whom is the arm of the Lord revealed?" The arm or the strength, the might of God revealed. To whom is revealed? Israel didn't see it. They didn't see it. What they saw was a weak man dying upon that cross who could not stop what God was doing to him, what the government was doing to him, what they were doing to him. So no, they didn't see the arm of the Lord. We see it. His disciples saw it, though. His followers, those who believed, who happened to follow him out there, they saw in what was going on, maybe feebly at that moment, as they still were struggling to understand. They saw the mighty arm of God, because he was not dying on that cross because he had to. He was not dying upon that cross because they overpowered him. He wasn't even dying on that cross because he had no choice. He wasn't driven to it. He allowed himself to be led to it, like a lamb to slaughter, as we'll see in just a little bit. It was for us, for our iniquities. It was in our place that the Messiah suffered. And so we see the mighty arm of God. One of the greatest signs of biblical manliness is not how big the weight is that they can lift, or how many men they can fight at one time, or how accurate they are with their firearm or knife throwing or whatever it is they think makes them manly. One of the greatest signs of a godly man, of a manly man of God, is his meekness. His ability to take that strength that he has and to channel it into something that is useful to the Lord. And so we see the arm of God channeled down, channeled smaller and smaller, until we see Jesus Christ there upon that cross with the blood flowing from everywhere on his body. And there is the distilled power of God running down that cross to the ground. This is the arm of the Lord. He was wounded for our transgressions. I must point out here that he was not wounded for his transgressions. He wasn't hanging upon that cross because he was a revolutionary and he had stirred up a revolt against the Roman government. We know that that's not true. He wasn't there because he stirred up a revolt against the Sanhedrin even. They just simply could not stand by and let truth be known. And so they had to stand against him. No, he was wounded for our transgressions. You know what this makes me think of? This makes me think of that first lamb that was killed. Adam and Eve sinned. And now they have to come to grips with the eternal consequences of their sin. And so God brings out this little lamb that was spotless, that was innocent. Understand that up to this point, nothing had ever died in the universe. Nothing. I can't comprehend that or understand that, but he brings this little lamb, and as they put their hands on that lamb and kill it, and that lamb sheds its blood, that lamb is paying the price for their sin. That's what the sacrifice is all about. Blood had to be shed. Blood had to be shed because rebellion and sin is always going to result in death. And so blood had to be shed. And God was teaching Adam and Eve way back at the very beginning this lesson. Blood has to be shed because of the decision you made. And they watched the very first animal ever die on this earth. I don't know how it affected them. I'm sure they were quite affected by it. The results of everything that was going on at that moment for them, as they watched the blood drain out of that lamb for the very first time and understand that this lamb gave their life to cover their sins. And so from that very first picture of the Messiah, back there in the Garden of Eden, throughout Israel's history, the lamb, the goat, the dove, whatever the sacrifice was, the bullock, the blood was shed for one purpose alone. To pay that animal had to pay the price for what the owner had done, for the owner's sin. And it could only cover it temporarily. They had to keep coming back. It was never sufficient until Jesus. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. Yes, the Messiah was stricken and smitten by God and afflicted, but he explains why it was. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. That which gained peace for us wreaked chastisement upon him. Chastisement is that discipline for sin. He didn't sin, I did. But instead of me getting the chastisement for it, he reaped it willingly. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. It says, and with his stripes we are healed. And here the prophet sees through the centuries, and he knows that the Messiah would be meeting with many stripes, the cat of nine tails, that his back would be whipped raw and bloody. And he announces here the provision for healing is found in the suffering of Jesus. So by his stripes we are healed. Is this physical healing? Spiritual healing? There are some New Testament passages that seem to indicate a physical healing as a result. There's other passages that certainly speak of the spiritual healing. But let's understand this. By his stripes we are healed. By his whipping we are healed. This is not talking about claiming the blood of Christ for physical healing and physical ailments. Some people have taken this to mean that every believer has the right to perfect health right now. That's what their lady preachers on TV are telling them. You got to claim this promise, and you have the promise, the right to perfect health right now. And if there's any lack of health, it's because this promise has not been claimed in faith. There's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with your faith. But wait a minute. The Bible doesn't say that it was by your faith that they're healed. It says by his stripes you are healed. That's already done. That's on his back, literally, not yours. That means it has nothing to do with me. This healing has nothing to do with me. It was him. It is not promised to every believer right now. I think God's ultimate healing here is called the resurrection. We are resurrected, and one day we are going to have perfect bodies. I don't know what Harold's going to look like when he has a perfect body. I don't know if I'll recognize. I'm just kidding. What's a perfect body mean? I don't know. What's the perfect age? I mean, sometimes we wonder those things, you know. Having had, miscarriages, what are our children like right now? What age are they? If you think about it, they're older than all of my kids then right now, because they're probably the age of an adult right now in heaven. What age are we going to be? Are we going to go back to being 30 years old again? I don't know the answer to any of those questions, so don't bother asking me. We'll find out when we get there. I'm sure we'll be plenty satisfied with whatever the answer is going to be when we get there. But what a Christian must not do is foolishly claim to be healed, even if the symptoms happen to say otherwise, and then just believe that they're standing on the promise of Isaiah 53:5. But what a Christian needs to do is this, to boldly trust God's goodness and mercy in granting spiritual healing upon sanctification, upon salvation. Listen to this quote about this passage. With his stripes we are healed. Will you notice the fact that healing of a sinner does not lie in himself, nor in what he is, nor in what he feels, nor in what he does, nor in what he vows, nor in what he promises. It is not in himself at all. But there at Gabbatha, where the pavement is stained with the blood of the Son of God, and there at Golgotha, where the place of a skull beholds the agonies of Christ, it is in his stripes that the healing lies. I beseech thee, do not scourge thyself. With his stripes we are healed. Boy, you know what that does? That removes the burden from off us. The burden that religion has so very heavy-handedly put there upon all of mankind, that you have to do and do and do and do and do and forsake and forsake and forsake and forsake and punish yourself and punish yourself and punish yourself so that God knows you're really sorry. So that maybe, just maybe, when you stand before St. Peter at the pearly gates, as they like to talk about, then maybe the weights will be in your favor and you might be allowed into heaven. But that's not biblical at all. In fact, the Bible makes it very black and white. Look at the next phrase. All we like sheep have gone astray. Okay, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. All. There is not one, the Bible says. For all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And so the prophet speaks about our need for the Messiah's atoning work here. His atonement. His shed blood as a replacement for our having to shed our blood, or our having to pay the payment for our own sin. Sheep have gone astray. Sheep are dumb. They're headstrong animals. They decide they want to do something, and they decide they're going to do it, and not much is going to hinder them from doing it unless the shepherd clobbers them. Sometimes they get it in their head that this is going to taste good and they're going to eat it. They get it in their head that over there is the best grass and they're going to go over there regardless of what dangers may be there or where the shepherd has tried to get them. Sounds a whole lot like us, doesn't it? Headstrong, dumb. We've gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way. You know, we all have our own way of sin. But here's the temptation we must avoid. It's easy to condemn somebody else's way of sin while justifying my way of sin. It's easy to point out other people's inconsistencies while ignoring my own or explaining away my own. But you know what? My pride is every bit as sinful as yours. And my lies are every bit as an abomination as yours. My indifference and apathy towards the lost fate of the world is every bit as bad as yours. My sin, my own way, is always going to be wrong. And you go out there in our community and you knock on 100 doors, and you know what you're going to find? 100 ways that people are trying to find their way to God. Unless you happen to knock on a born-again Christian's door. You're going to find 100 ways that people are trying to find some peace in their life, if they even believe in eternal life at all. But each way that is our own way, it is doomed to destruction. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. Here we see a partnership between the Father and the Son. Jesus didn't rebel and run off to earth to go and perform this task, and God the Father just couldn't stop him from doing it. No, that wasn't it at all. It was the plan. When God's precious children chose to eat of that fruit and rebel, a problem was created. Really, before that, when Lucifer decided to rebel and lift himself up in pride, a problem was created. And there was only one way for this problem to be solved and healed. And it was for a sacrifice to be made. Death is always the result of sin. And so the Lord laid on him, this is the servant of God, this is the servant Jesus Christ, the Messiah, laid on him the iniquity of us all. We see a partnership between the Father and the Son in what happens here on the cross. If the Messiah was wounded for our transgressions, then it was the Lord who laid on him the iniquity of us all. Think about that too. Jesus did his part and got himself to the cross. And the Father did his part and laid upon him the iniquity of us all. And then couldn't bear to look at him. It was all laid upon the Son. We see in Isaiah 53, and we're going to stop there, but we see in Isaiah 53 what makes biblical Christianity so unique. Because this story is not about some man that is doing some heroic thing which is worthy of praise. This story is not about some man trying to be the example to us for us to follow in our sacrifice so that we can then earn the pleasure of God, so that we can then earn the forgiveness of God. This story, unlike every other religion of the world, is not trying to tell us what we have to do in order to appease God. This story is revealing to us what God did to redeem us back to Him. Revealing to us the extent of His love toward us. It was His stripes. It was God placing iniquity upon His shoulders. Everything was planned and performed from heaven. And it has nothing to do with me, except that it was my sin that He bore. And that it is my heart that has to make the decision on whether or not I will place my faith and trust in Jesus Christ and what He did on the cross to save me from my sins. I'm enjoying chapter 53. I hope you can sense that. But we will continue and finish the chapter next week. Notice we still have not, the passage still has not talked about His death yet. If you were reading this passage and you didn't know anything, if you were reading this passage at the time of Isaiah, it hasn't talked about death yet at all. Maybe there's still some question marks in their minds. Who's this talking about? We know. And we'll come back and we'll start at verse number 7 next Wednesday night, and we'll continue on through the end of the chapter. I hope you're looking forward to it. I am looking forward to getting a little further into it.